When a privacy incident happens, the first few hours can feel confusing because information arrives in fragments and everyone wants an immediate answer to what happened and whether anyone is harmed. In a well-run privacy program, that confusion is reduced by having a predictable set of steps that the organization follows every time, even when the details are messy. The steps in the title are not random labels, because assessment, containment, remediation, and documentation form a practical chain that takes you from uncertainty to control. If you skip assessment, you may overreact or underreact and waste precious time. If you skip containment, the incident may continue while people argue about details. If you skip remediation, the same weakness may cause another incident next week. If you skip documentation, you may be unable to prove what happened or show that you handled it responsibly. The goal here is not to turn you into an emergency responder overnight, but to help you understand how these steps work together so incident handling becomes a disciplined process instead of a scramble. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A useful way to begin is by clarifying what counts as an incident in a privacy program, because beginners sometimes assume an incident only means a dramatic breach reported on the news. A privacy incident is any event where personal data might have been accessed, used, disclosed, altered, lost, or made unavailable in a way that is not intended or not authorized. That can include sending data to the wrong recipient, leaving a file accessible to the wrong group, losing a device containing personal data, or a system flaw that exposes data to outsiders. It can also include misuse inside the organization, such as a person accessing data without a work-related reason. The word might is important because incident handling often begins before you know whether harm occurred or whether exposure is confirmed. A program that waits for certainty before acting will often act too late. A program that treats early signals seriously can contain potential harm quickly, then refine the response as facts become clearer. Understanding that incidents include small operational mistakes is essential because most organizations encounter those far more often than headline-level breaches, and those smaller events can still cause real harm. Assessment is the first step for a reason, because it is where you turn a raw alert into a clear understanding of what you are dealing with. Assessment begins with basic questions that sound simple, but are often hard to answer under pressure. What happened? When did it start? How was it detected? And what personal data might be involved? It also asks who could be affected, such as customers, employees, or other individuals, and whether the data includes sensitive categories that raise the impact. A good assessment avoids guessing and focuses on evidence, even if the evidence is incomplete at first. That means gathering the initial facts, capturing them in a timeline, and identifying what you still do not know. It also means deciding whether the event is likely to be a privacy incident, a security issue without personal data, or something else like a system outage. Beginners sometimes think assessment is a single decision, but it is more like a short cycle that repeats as new information arrives. The outcome of assessment is clarity about scope and risk, which is what guides containment and remediation choices. During assessment, one of the most important beginner lessons is learning to separate confirmed facts from assumptions, because assumptions can quietly shape decisions in the wrong direction. For example, someone might assume an email attachment was never opened, or assume a file was not downloaded, or assume the wrong person will delete what they received. Those assumptions might be true, but incident handling should treat them as unverified until evidence supports them. Another assessment habit is mapping the data involved to potential harms, because harm is not automatic and it depends on context. Exposure of an email address might be lower impact than exposure of a government ID number, but even an email address could be high impact if it reveals membership in a sensitive group or ties to a confidential service. Assessment also asks whether the incident is still ongoing, because an active incident requires faster containment decisions than a completed incident that ended days ago. When you train yourself to think this way, assessment becomes calmer and more structured, and that structure prevents the team from spinning in circles. The better the assessment, the more proportional and effective the next steps become. Containment is the step where you stop the bleeding, and it often needs to happen while assessment is still underway. The goal of containment is to prevent further unauthorized access, disclosure, or misuse, and the correct containment action depends on the incident type. For an exposure caused by a misconfigured access setting, containment might mean restricting access immediately, even if you are not sure who already accessed the data. For an email sent to the wrong recipient, containment might involve asking the recipient to delete the message and confirming the request was received, while also preventing similar messages from being sent. For a compromised account, containment might involve disabling access, forcing credential resets, and watching for ongoing access attempts. The key beginner concept is that containment aims to limit ongoing harm, not to perfectly solve the problem in the moment. It should be fast, reversible when possible, and documented so the team can explain why it acted quickly. Containment also requires coordination, because privacy teams often rely on security, operations, and IT teams to execute technical containment actions. A mature program has predefined escalation paths, so containment decisions are not delayed by confusion about who is allowed to act. Containment decisions should be guided by proportionality, because it is possible to contain too aggressively in ways that cause unnecessary disruption. Shutting down an entire service might stop a possible exposure, but it could also harm users if the service is critical, and it could create new problems that distract from the incident response. A disciplined approach weighs the risk of continued exposure against the cost of disruption and chooses the least disruptive action that still reduces risk effectively. This is also where you see why assessment and containment are linked, because even partial assessment can tell you whether the risk is high enough to justify a stronger containment step. For example, if the exposed dataset includes highly sensitive information, stronger containment is often justified even if it causes friction. If the data is limited and low sensitivity, containment might focus on a smaller targeted fix. Containment also includes preserving evidence, which can be overlooked when teams rush. If logs and records are overwritten or access trails are lost, later analysis becomes difficult and the organization may be unable to prove what occurred. Good containment reduces harm while protecting the ability to learn and document what happened. Remediation is the step that fixes the underlying cause and strengthens the environment so the incident does not repeat in the same way. Beginners sometimes confuse remediation with containment, but containment is about stopping the immediate issue, while remediation is about correcting weaknesses and addressing contributing factors. Remediation often includes technical changes, like correcting access controls, patching a vulnerable component, improving authentication requirements, or adding monitoring where visibility was weak. It can also include process changes, like adding a review step before files are shared externally, improving training for teams handling sensitive data, or tightening approval steps for data exports. Remediation should not be a vague promise to be more careful, because vague promises do not survive busy workdays. It should be concrete, with clear ownership and deadlines, because unresolved remediation becomes residual risk that sits quietly in the environment. Remediation decisions also benefit from root cause thinking, where you ask not just what failed, but why it failed and what conditions made the failure likely. This is how you shift from treating incidents as random bad luck to treating them as preventable outcomes of system design. A useful way to think about remediation is to separate immediate fixes from long-term improvements, because not everything can be corrected overnight. Some remediation actions are quick, like changing a setting, rotating credentials, or removing a public link. Other actions take longer, like redesigning a workflow, improving data mapping, or rebuilding how retention is enforced across systems. Both types matter, and both should be tracked, because long-term improvements are often where the biggest risk reduction lives. Another remediation principle is to make sure the fix matches the risk, because organizations sometimes invest heavily in visible changes that do not address the true cause. For example, adding training might be useful, but if the problem was a system design that made mistakes easy, training alone will not reliably prevent recurrence. Similarly, adding a new policy might look decisive, but policies do not enforce themselves without process and technical support. Remediation also needs validation, meaning you confirm the fix actually works and does not create new issues. If you change access controls, you should confirm the data is no longer exposed and that the right people still have access for legitimate work. Validation is part of responsible remediation because unvalidated fixes can create false confidence. Documentation is not the last step because it is least important, but because it is the thread that runs through every step and becomes most visible after the incident is under control. Documentation is how you preserve the timeline, the decisions, the evidence, and the actions taken, so the organization can explain the incident to leadership, regulators, customers, and itself. Good documentation captures what happened, when it was discovered, what containment actions were taken and why, what data categories were involved, and what remediation actions were planned and completed. It also captures uncertainty honestly, such as what could not be confirmed and what assumptions were avoided. Beginners often think documentation is just writing a report at the end, but in practice, the most useful documentation starts immediately and is updated as facts evolve. If you wait until the end, details will be forgotten, and the record will become incomplete or inaccurate. Documentation should also be organized so it can support different needs, such as internal learning, legal analysis, and operational tracking of remediation. A strong privacy program treats documentation as a safeguard because it reduces the risk of inconsistent stories and shows that the program handled the incident with discipline. Documentation also supports one of the most important goals in incident handling, which is accountability. Accountability means you can show who made which decision, what information they had at the time, and what actions were taken as a result. This matters because incident response often involves trade-offs, such as acting quickly with limited information or choosing between competing containment options. When those trade-offs are documented, the organization can demonstrate it acted reasonably and responsibly. Documentation also supports continuity, because incidents do not always resolve within a single shift or a single day, and team members may rotate. Without clear records, new responders may repeat work, miss key details, or take conflicting actions. Another documentation benefit is learning, because patterns across incident records can reveal recurring weaknesses, like repeated missends, repeated access misconfigurations, or repeated vendor-related issues. Those patterns then inform improvements to controls, training, and monitoring. Documentation should also respect privacy itself, meaning you should not copy excessive personal data into incident records if it is not needed. The incident record should capture the evidence required to understand scope and actions without creating a new, unnecessary dataset. Another key beginner concept is understanding how privacy incident handling intersects with security incident response, because many incidents involve both domains. Security teams often focus on threats, systems, and technical containment, while privacy teams focus on personal data, obligations, and communications with individuals and oversight bodies. These perspectives are complementary, and a well-run program coordinates them so actions are consistent. For example, security might isolate a system, preserve logs, and investigate access patterns, while privacy evaluates what personal data types were involved, what rights and harms are at stake, and what notifications might be required. Coordination matters because decisions in one domain can affect the other. If security resets access broadly, that may disrupt the ability to gather evidence unless evidence preservation was planned. If privacy communicates too early without confirmed facts, it could create confusion or inaccurate statements. The best approach is a shared incident process with clear roles, where assessment, containment, remediation, and documentation are performed with both technical and privacy perspectives. For beginners, the key is not to treat privacy incidents as separate from security, but also not to assume security automatically covers privacy. Privacy adds specific questions about individuals, obligations, and accountability that must be addressed deliberately. Incident handling is also tied to risk assessment, because an incident often reveals that previous assumptions about controls and risk were incomplete. When an incident occurs, it is a signal that something in the environment allowed that event to happen, whether through system design, process gaps, human error, or unexpected behavior. A mature program uses incidents to update its understanding of where risk is highest and where monitoring should be strengthened. For example, if a misconfiguration exposed data, the program may revisit change management controls and add stronger checks for similar settings. If a vendor contributed to the issue, the program may revisit vendor monitoring, contract obligations, and transfer risk assumptions. If the incident involved delayed detection, the program may improve logging, alerting, and regular reviews. This is how incidents become part of continuous improvement rather than isolated crises. For beginners, it helps to see incidents as feedback about the real world, not as proof that the program is failing. A program fails when it learns nothing and repeats the same incident patterns. A program succeeds when it reduces recurrence and improves resilience. Communication is not listed in the title, but it is tightly connected to these steps because assessment and documentation shape what you can responsibly say and when you can say it. Even internally, communication needs to be careful because rumors and partial facts can spread quickly and create unnecessary panic. Externally, if notifications are required, they must be accurate, timely, and clear, and that depends on having good assessment and documentation. Containment and remediation also affect communication because they change the risk picture over time, such as whether the exposure is ongoing or stopped. A strong approach is to communicate what is known, what is being done, and what will be updated, without making promises that cannot be supported by evidence. Beginners sometimes feel pressure to provide certainty immediately, but in incident response, honesty about uncertainty is often safer than confident guesses. This is another reason documentation matters, because it helps you keep statements aligned with evidence. The overall goal is to manage the incident in a way that supports trust, and trust is strengthened when communication is consistent and backed by documented actions. As you develop skill in these steps, it becomes clear that incident handling is not just a technical emergency plan, but an operational capability that must be practiced through routine use and review. Assessment improves when teams know what questions to ask and where to get evidence. Containment improves when escalation paths are clear and responders know which actions they are authorized to take. Remediation improves when root causes are analyzed and fixes are tracked to completion instead of fading away after the crisis. Documentation improves when record-keeping begins early and is maintained consistently rather than rushed at the end. These improvements do not require a dramatic transformation, but they do require discipline and repetition. Over time, the organization gets faster and calmer because it has seen similar patterns before and knows how to respond. That calmness is not complacency, because it is grounded in a process that works. For beginners, the most practical takeaway is that these steps are designed to reduce chaos. When you follow them, you create order and reduce harm even when the incident itself is stressful. When you put everything together, the 4 steps form a loop that turns a risky event into a controlled, learnable experience. Assessment defines what happened and what is at stake, so decisions are based on evidence rather than fear. Containment limits ongoing exposure and protects both individuals and the organization while investigation continues. Remediation fixes the causes and strengthens controls so the same failure is less likely to recur, turning a crisis into a chance to reduce future risk. Documentation preserves the timeline and the decisions so accountability is real and so learning can be applied across the program. A privacy program that can reliably execute these steps is more credible because it can demonstrate that it handles problems responsibly rather than hiding them or improvising. It also supports continuous improvement because incidents feed back into risk assessment, monitoring, training, and vendor oversight. For brand new learners, this is the most important conclusion. Incident handling is not a single dramatic moment, but a disciplined set of actions that you can understand, practice, and improve over time. When you master the fundamentals, you help ensure that privacy commitments hold up not only in normal operations, but also when something goes wrong.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.